Doing? All right. Well, we appreciate you guys coming to our talk this morning. Thank you. Our presentation is Sock Them in the Face, Building and Attacking SOCs. My name is Eric Carroll, and this is Andrew Johnston. All right, so a little bit about us. As I mentioned, my name is Eric Carroll. I'm currently a strategic consultant at Mandiant, FireEye Company. Former threat hunter, SOC analyst, incident responder, so have a wide range of skill sets doing various positions within this industry. Some hobbies I enjoy and get into, I'm a DJ on the side, so definitely interested in music and of all genres. Sports enthusiast, car guy, preferably German vehicles, and then a world traveler. And I'm a Pittsburgh native, born and raised. And apparently, I guess I didn't look at the updated slide deck, but being a DJ, I guess I tend to play Justin Bieber music.
I thought the conference needed to know. So my name is Andrew Johnston. I'm a proactive consultant at Mandiant, so I spend most of my time doing red teams, web application assessments, social engineering, things like that. On the side, I also run a research lab at Fordham University, where we're using artificial intelligence to fight terrorism online. In terms of my hobbies, I'm really interested in hacking ATMs, picking locks, and shooting guns. Pretty much any hobby that would count as probable cause, I'm into. This is my first time in Pittsburgh, but it's my third B-Sides presentation, and I'm very excited to be here.
Just to note, Andrew is traveling from New York City to come to B-Sides Pittsburgh today. All right, to help us understand why you guys all chose to attend our talk, not saying, but I think the gold track today is a bit overloaded and better, but
that's why it's the gold track.
Just to understand the audience that we have in front of us today, how many of you currently work in a SOC or have previously worked in a SOC? Please raise your hand. All right, so quite a lot. How many of you currently hold a role in the red team side of things or previously held a role in the red team?
Cool guys, where are
you? How about the blue team? Okay. How many of you currently are not holding a role in the cybersecurity industry, but do this as a hobby on the side or are a current student studying a cybersecurity degree? All right, some students in the house. Thanks for joining. All right, to outline why Andrew and I are here, so we have experience with SOCs. I've worked in SOCs previously, and Andrew's perspective is more from the attack side of things from a SOC standpoint. SOCs are just another team in the organization, except they tend to have better computers than everyone else in the company. And the key goal of this talk today is we're going to get into some technical contents, but we also want to focus on non-technical as well, doing a pretty even split of both. But we really want to engage really the human vulnerabilities that exist within a SOC or a security program overall, as us and all of you end users, are the most vulnerable. So we'll discuss some of our experiences from the front lines, being consultants, what we see out in the field. So we're going to step into 3 different scenarios with you guys today. So the first scenario we're going to kick off, but we'll get to our disclaimer here first.
Sure. So before we begin, we have to give the usual legal disclaimer. The stuff we're talking about today represents the sum total of our experiences. We're not talking about any one specific client, but rather overarching or unique problems that we've seen that we think deserve more attention. When we reference a client or say the organization, we're really referring to this case study and not a specific organization we've worked for.
All right, so let's get started. The first scenario we've titled Gods in the SOC. So a little bit about Gods in the SOC. So this specific organization followed a typical tier 1 to 3 model. Tier 1 being more of the eyes on glass, the monitoring and detection team members. Tier 2 being the escalation point for those tier 1 resources, and then tier 2 taking that up to the tier 3 level, which is typically your forensic analyst, whether that's an internal capability that the organization has, or they're leveraging those services externally. So for this particular organization, they had a combination of both. So they had some internal forensics capabilities as well as a managed service for forensic support. In addition, there was, just to understand the organization, they had more senior folks, so folks that have been with the organization for more than 5 years, that have been in this industry for quite some time, so have a wide range of skill sets across the spectrum from both a blue team and red team side of things. And then in addition, they had some junior team members that recently came out of college, graduated, or went through their internal development program to try to build up people internally versus hire from the outside. So there was a combination of senior and then junior level folks within this security program. So the real breakdown with this situation is you have several teams within the SOC. Your monitoring detection team, and then they had intel, and then red team operations that were focused on performing red team exercises quite frequently up into a weekly or a bi-weekly basis. So there was a lot going on from trying to process, alerts, triage those, in addition to keeping up with the red team's exercises that they were performing. So the SOC overall was pretty overwhelmed, wearing multiple hats to support the current initiatives that were going on to keep the network secure. Some of the outcomes for this specific scenario are as follows. So the suspicious alerts weren't being acted on. So as I mentioned, there was a lot going on between the SOC analysts trying to prioritize and keep up, with alerts that were being generated within the security information event manager that they had. In addition to collaboration, communication breakdown between senior and junior member folks. So that was a key point here, that the senior folks, knew the lay of the land. They knew, the day-to-day operations, but that necessarily wasn't being passed down or coached to the junior level folks there. So definitely a concern from an organizational standpoint. And then just from a project perspective, things weren't being prioritized. The current staff, SOC staff members, weren't aware of, what to work on first. It was, purely just kind of pick and choose, if you will, what they wanted to do that day.
This is a problem that we see a lot. A lot of the times we'll see SOCs where especially the junior members, but sometimes a large portion of the SOC, really has never been in a serious security incident or compromise. So at the end of the day, they're relying on what they see in the tools. And if an attacker is knowledgeable, maybe those alerts don't look as suspicious as they should. Maybe file names kind of match up with what they would expect. So if there's not a lot of communication going on, you end up with tier 1, your people on the ground, who might see an alert, and it could be indicative of something really bad, but it looks just benign enough that it kind of gets passed on. So you need that collaboration between the two, or stuff gets ignored and really bad things can come.
All right, moving into scenario number 2. Oh no, my crown jewels. So this particular scenario had no executive support, so no buy-in from the executives, and in understanding the security program, current initiatives. So there's really no insight into what was going on. It's just, hey, we have a security program, so we're good, right? So that was one thing we observed with this particular organization. In addition to cybersecurity, not everyone was aware of cybersecurity, what was going on, even outside of the executives. But in addition, the sensitive data or critical assets, that this organization had were never really listed out or prioritized in what we need to secure most. So that's an important part that this organization failed to do. Never define, what the sensitive data was or their, highest revenue assets that they have. In addition here, they were limited on resourcing. So it's something we see quite a bit across organizations is very minimal staff. People are often tasked to support and wear multiple hats. So that's nothing new in this organization was the same way. And they had two environments. One environment was the corporate environment that had security controls in place. So they had, AV, anti-malware solutions, IDS, IPS, had SIM. So they had a pretty good list of tools. But the other environment that was international focused was more dedicated to the sales folks. And it was like the Wild Wild West. There was nothing in place, no security controls at all, so no AV, nothing. It was, just kind of fend off yourself. If something happens over there, it happens. But our top priority right now is just focusing on the corporate environment. So that was a big concern with this organization. Having two environments like that, it's extremely important. For you to balance and have, controls in place on both sides. So some of the outcomes for this particular organization are as follows. So as I mentioned, there was very poor visibility into the crown jewels. One of the first things when you're developing a security program or looking to take, your security program to the next step, you need to make sure all your sensitive data is defined in addition to having those controls in place on those critical assets once that is defined. In addition here, there was minimal network segmentation or isolation capabilities. So as I mentioned, the corporate network, had some controls in place. They were doing some segmentation by VLANs, but the sales network was nothing in place there. So Andrew, if you could help gauge the audience with, what are some concerns you seeing from the red team side of things with having a network that's unsecured like that?
Sure. So a lot of organizations I've seen, they do have one part of the network that isn't as secure, and it's kind of accepted that it is that way for operational reasons or some other non-technical reason. But it's a really bad situation to get in, because when you have one part of your network that just isn't held up to the security standards you want, attackers are going to find that, and they might even find it first. And attackers, can live in there, they can escalate their privileges, and they can exploit the fact that visibility is poor, or just that patches aren't applied as frequently, and then they can use the privileges they gain there to move laterally into the more secured environment. Now, of course, nowadays you need to have a tiered defense, and giving extra security to your crown jewels, your most sensitive data and processes, that's a great idea. But it should never be a question of bad security versus good security. It should be a question of good security versus better security. So it's a real common trap, and it's a very dangerous one to fall into.
All right, so the third bullet here, the outcome of that, as you guys may have expected, was an external service determined that this organization was indeed compromised via a vulnerable web server. So in addition, this organization had skill set gap issues, so minimal staff in place, therefore, people wearing multiple hats to try to support, everything that was tasked at hand, but they just didn't have the skills in place to cover everything. So some issues around, hiring those critical areas. And then focus on prioritizing initiatives. That's something this organization never did. It was, hey, I'm going to come to work and figure out, what to do. And a lot of that was the individual kind of choosing that versus, leadership, handing that down. So having good management in place is very important.
So every once in a while, we're asked to do a red team where the goal is specifically to kind of mess with the SOC and how they operate. So to attack not only the members of the SOC, but also their tooling and show that successful exploitation could actually lead to a scenario where the attackers are able to completely manipulate and control what the SOC can see and actually how it's able to respond to an incident. And so we'll explore it a bit in depth. So in this particular scenario, we had there was a very mature SOC. Most of the members had actually been with the organization for a number of years, and this wasn't even their first position. So they've been around, they've seen a number of things, and they actually had some amazing tooling and some great documentation for their newcomers that would explain not only how they detect things, but how they go through the processes and how they use what they have in order to investigate and remediate incidents. The problem they had was kind of external to them in that they were tested way too regularly. They were undergoing a full scope red team, so a 4 to 6 week engagement every single quarter. So about 50% of their time they were actually being actively tested and attacked. And the problem was, in addition to these regular assessments, they would have to show at the end of the assessment that they could successfully detect every single technique that the attackers used. And this came all the way down to things like domain names or file names. So they had to show that they could cover 100% of what happened. And this remediation, this testing and patching process, it was seen as it was problems with the SOC, and upper management was using red teams as a way to kind of evaluate the performance of the SOC. And anytime a red teamer was successful in any way, upper management was viewing this as a failure of the SOC itself. So the outcome of that was very negative. It didn't create a great environment. You know what? So red team members ended up being viewed as this guy. And when it came time to actually talk with these SOC members about what we had done and how we moved through their environment, they didn't see it as a learning experience, right? Because they knew what was coming afterwards. They saw the red team as combatants, as people doing performance reviews of how well they were doing. And a lot of the more senior members in the SOC were really frustrated because they knew that going into all of their systems and putting in alerts for the domains that a red team had purchased for an engagement wasn't going to create better security. It was just a complete waste of time. And they ended up spending more of their time doing things like that and implementing these checks in order to appease upper management than they were doing things like building out their great documentation or doing additional training.
All right, so we covered 3 scenarios with you guys, and now the next few slides we're going to cover, how do we fix some of these issues that we've mentioned in the 3 scenarios that we've covered. So on this slide, some signs of an unhealthy SOC. So many of you mentioned that you currently work in a SOC or have previously worked in a SOC. So these are some of the things in those scenarios that we've observed. Corporate politics, huge egos existing. So getting into the senior versus junior team members, skill set gaps. So I think that exists across the board in all 3 of these scenarios. Hiring difficulties. So based on the locations and where these security programs were, they had hiring difficulties. So not able to get the key skills that were required to have a successful security program. Lack of end user security awareness, so there was no education to the end users. Us being humans, being the most vulnerable, that's extremely important to make sure you are educating your end users quite frequently. And then a communication collaboration breakdown. So A SOC is another team in the organization. There's several teams that comprise a SOC. So you have your monitoring detection, your eyes on glass, your intel, your forensics teams, data protection teams. So it's important that you guys are communicating and collaborating effectively across all those teams, whether you're a junior member or a senior. So our top 5 recommendations, keeping in mind, we're limited on the slides here, so we definitely could have outlined more than 5 recommendations, but we at least wanted to cover kind of our top 5 out of the 3 scenarios. So politics, huge egos exist in nearly every organization that I've been a part of or assessed. So do your best to work around those. It's nothing new. Every organization experiences that to an extent, but ensuring that that's not a roadblock or a barrier for you or your security program, making sure to do your best to work around those and focus on the end goal, which is to protect and secure your organization. Next, shadowing is the most important tool. Take advantage of that. So I know when I started my career, and many of you in this audience I've worked with, that's one thing that I always go back to for the success that I've had in this industry, is leveraging the senior folks and really learning from them. So trying to absorb as much knowledge as I can about those folks. Take advantage of that. So whether you're studying for a certification or taking classes for a degree, once you get out into the corporate world and get your first security position, learn as much as you can, shadow, shoulder surf, do all that you can to take advantage of that.
Another one of our big takeaways is that red teaming is a great thing, and I'm not just saying that because I do it all the time. It's a great tool, and it's a learning experience. But red teaming should be seen as a way to compare how the organization's current security initiatives line up with reality of what attackers are doing. Securing a large organization, as many of you know, is incredibly difficult, if not outright impossible, to do perfectly. And red teaming is just a way to compare that. It's not a reflection on how anyone's doing or whether or not people are doing their jobs.
And our 4th recommendation is no matter what team you're a part of, whether you're in the SOC, focused on IT, the infrastructure side, or even from the business side of things, know your role and responsibilities. So I can't emphasize on that enough that it's important that you know your swim lanes and stay in those swim lanes and know when to reach out for help or know when to hand things off. From an incident response perspective, that's extremely important, that when you're put in a situation like that where response times are critical, you need to make sure that you know your role and responsibilities, and your coworkers know the same. And our 5th and final recommendation, which in my opinion is the most important, is educating your end users as much as possible. I can't stress this enough. I evaluate organizations on a weekly basis, and this is something across the board that often organizations fail to do, is not only put a budget in place towards this with training or an education program internally, or leveraging a service externally, but making sure to develop bulletins or have an internal capability for end users to reach out when they receive suspicious emails, or maybe it's a social engineering issue, but never turn down away end users for sharing that knowledge. Some of the best intel is going to come directly from your end users within your organization, so always encourage that to continue. All right, and that wraps up our presentation. I'd like to take this time to address any questions that you guys may have.
Good.
You guys found practicality in doing purple team exercises as opposed to just red team?
Absolutely. So purple team collaboration is great. So for some people that might not be familiar with the term, a purple team exercise is when a red team works hand in hand with a blue team in order to see what's working and what doesn't. It's a different set of tactics in terms of, I think the best kind of purple teams they don't have the covert quality that a standard red team would have. But rather the red teamers can be installed inside the SOC, and it should just be a matter of seeing what kind of things are alerting, do common tactics alert, and also just trying to see how effective the alerting is. A lot of tools will say that they will stop all instances of Mimikatz or something like that. So seeing where the faults are, but it should definitely be a more collaborative exercise, and the covert aspect should be scaled down in favor of generating alerts when they're meaningful.
Any other questions? In the front?
I wanted to get your opinion on the effectiveness of when, let me try to describe it, like when red and blue teams play like kind of game scenarios or like simulations versus a more covert red team that is like acting like a true unknown attacker, and the blue team doesn't really have a heads up or anything like that. Are both effective, or is one better than the other?
Sure. Yeah, you want to take it? All right.
Yeah, I'll take the first half. So as we mentioned in this scenario, we often see internal red team capabilities that spend too much time performing red team exercises to where the SOC team members just can't keep up with the findings out of those red team exercises. So managing day-to-day operations with what they're doing within the SOC, keeping the monitoring detection analyst in place. There's no time dedicated towards taking action to those findings out of those reports. So what I often see is an overload to where the red team's trying to share their findings to the SOC, and the SOC just simply can't manage putting the patches in place to cover those gaps from the findings that were observed, in addition to maintaining keeping the network secure and detecting. Would you like to add to that?
Sure. So I think both have their place. The benefit and the main problem with a covert red team is that the attackers are only going to use whatever they need in order to complete the objective. Since it's an objective-based test, they're not going to touch anything that isn't directly contributing to accomplishing those objectives. So the more game style where a team may be aware, they have the benefit of attackers don't need to be concerned about being as covert as possible, and they can kind of just test the whole range of things. So maybe during the course of a covert red team, the attackers wouldn't try to break into or access every single web application that's hosted internally, but that may be a concern, and those should definitely be tested just like any other part of the internal network. So there's definitely benefits in both, and I think Eric touched on it's definitely a matter of timing them, so that way there's enough time to respond, because a lot of times the findings from either one point to a larger systemic issue as opposed to something that can just be fixed with a patch or some other quick fix. So yeah, both have their place, and I think covert red teams are great for simulating how or testing how well an organization could respond to a very sophisticated attack group that had a lot of time and a lot of knowledge. But yeah, both definitely have their place, and I don't think an organization would be complete with just doing one versus the other.
And just to add on, I think the frequency is important too, in ensuring that the management from the SOC side of things, in addition to the management on the red team side of things, communicate that ahead of time to establish a frequency. So doing that on a weekly basis, is overwhelming to your SOC. So agreeing on a time frame that works best, I think, is key there. Sure. All right, if there's no other questions, I think that wraps up our presentations. We have our contact information here. We'll be here throughout the rest of the day. If you guys have any further questions, we appreciate you guys dedicating your time today to attend our talk. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of B-Sides.
Thank you, guys.